here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome. This is workshop 2 as part of a capacity building workshop series put on by the Joan Ganz Cooney Center as part of the Next Gen Public Media Project. This workshop is titled Understanding Youth, a Prerequisite for Creating Programs by, with, for Tweens and Teens. So hopefully you meant to land here, and we're so excited to have you. I just wanted to take a few moments at the top of our workshop just to acknowledge the heaviness that so many of us are feeling this week as parents, as educators, after the tragic events in Texas and not long before that in Buffalo and so many others like them. Last workshop, we started by reading a poem that had been written by a young person. And so I wanted to continue that thread. And I'd like to share with you today the most recent poem that was written by Amanda Gorman just this week. And it's available on her Instagram if you'd like to read it afterwards. Schools scared to death. The truth is, one education under desks, stoop low from bullets that plunge when we ask where our children shall live and how and if. It takes a monster to kill children, but to watch monsters kill children again and again and do nothing isn't just insanity, it's inhumanity. The truth is, one nation under guns. What might we be if only we tried? What might we become if only we'd listen? I wanted to share those powerful words because I imagine Amanda Gorman had people in her life that gave her a platform for her voice, and that was so important in helping to shape her, our youngest poet laureate. And that is a theme for today, that we want to understand our young people as we meet them through these programs. And we feel, our team feels more inspired than ever and more empowered than ever to pursue this work we think is so important. And we're so happy you could be here with us today. So I'm going to give a brief overview of our agenda. And Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. We have a brief welcome. We will then be transitioning to our featured presentation with Jason Yip, who we're so excited to have join us today. Then our colleague, Elizabeth Rood, who you will see shortly. She's not on the spotlight here right now, but she is my fantastic collaborator and the lead author on our second research brief. We'll give a brief overview of that work. Then we'll move to some breakout group discussions on centering youth voices, applying that to your local context and organization. And then we'll do a quick debrief and a closing. And if the last workshop was any indication, it's gonna fly by. Next slide. So I think most of you here are already familiar with our work in this project, but just for anyone who dropped in here and isn't aware, our project is a research, development, and field building initiative to support the public media sector as it evolves to engage tween and teen audiences. And this project is funded by CPB. And so why this focus on tweens and teens? Well, the first phase of our project identified what we called a missing middle audience, in particular middle and high school kids. And we feel as though it is increasingly important for them to be engaged and well served and also participating in the development of programming. Next slide. And so our North Star for this project and everything we do is taking inspiration from our founder, Joan Ganz Cooney, And just like Sesame Street forever changed children's media, we want to be supporting a fundamental evolution in how public media approaches teen and tween programming. And we really want to set up the conditions for lifelong engagement with public media. So the research brief that we will talk about today is the second in this series. The first was focused on models of youth-adult collaboration for public media and is available on our website. The second brief will be published next month. And then there will be a third brief that's much more focused on content and platform innovation in July. And we did change the date for that workshop in order to enable our guest speakers to attend and give us a little more time to get prepared for that, quite honestly. And so that will take place on Wednesday, July 13th. And we hope you can join us for that one as well. And with that, I would like to introduce our esteemed guest speaker today, Jason Yip, who is from the University of Washington. Hi, Jason. Thank you for making time to join us today. Jason is Associate Professor of Digital Youth. What a cool title. Like I remember when I first started in this field, there were like hardly any programs, and now you're an Associate Professor of Digital Youth. That is awesome. At University of Washington, he's in the Information School, and he is Director of KidsTeam UW, an awesome, awesome project that is working directly with young people to help inform the design of technologies. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your work.
All right, thanks so much. Let me get myself set up real quick. Here we go. Let me hit the slideshow, hit start. Let's see, hit start. Okay, everyone see that? We're all good? Okay, I assume silence means you're good. So, hi, again, I one of the also things that I have a really nice connection with Sesame Workshop, also in the sense that I was a senior research fellow at the Joan Gans Cooney Center. So you are all like, folks in public media and Sesame, you're all near and dear to my heart. I'm going to be talking about a little bit of my work, and hopefully giving you a brief overview of just some of the stuff we've been doing with children and also teens as well. Like this, even though the majority of this talk is a little bit about kids, I've also done a lot of the span of work with middle school kids and high school kids in that same way too. So briefly, a lot of my research focuses on digital technologies influence on families, and especially how they collaboratively learn together. And, as we all sort of know, we are sort of in the modern family, and there's so much worry in families, and especially given this week and all of the heaviness of the world, families just go through so much, and even with COVID-19, there's this pervasive just abundance of caution and just ideas all about technology addiction and controversies and things like that. And so my work situates itself within sort of the changing nature of families, given that families, we're seeing divorce, separation, work separation, same-sex parenting, lower marriage rates, grandparents as parents, immigration, all the sorts of things that are just shifting and changing in the modern world. And so to sort of study a lot of what I look at with collaboration, I oftentimes build new technologies. I like to look at, what are the cool different ways that families can collaborate together? What are ways that we've really not thought about, parents and children, other people in the community? But I also like to look at how current technologies also influence that collaboration. Like, what are digital games doing? What are Internet of Things doing? What are ways in which that online searching influences families? And in that sort of messy middle is my work in participatory design. And this is where I was introduced as the director of KidsTeam UW. I'm going to give a brief overview of that in a moment, but I sort of use co-design and working with youth as a way to connect ideas about building new technologies and also investigating like what to study as well. So being that sort of working very closely with youth has always sort of been very, very core part of my research. And so KidsTeam UW, what is it? It is a year-long program that I've run for about 7 years now at the University of Washington. It started at the University of Maryland, so I always want to give credit to Allison Druin and folks at Maryland who's been doing this work for like 20 years or so. I was a graduate student taking a lot of the cues and learning a lot from them. And essentially what we did as grad students and also right now was work with kids, right? And work with teens and work with young adults and such like that. And so what we have here with these children are they are on the ground. They are designing here for the public library at Seattle Public Library, an obstacle course for the idea of using if you can sort of see on the far right corner, there are these little BB-8 robots right here. And then we have undergrads as well. These are undergrads. I think one of them is they graduated a while ago. They're working very closely with children, right? And the same can go with teens and other youth as well. Given that being able to be close to kids is something that really gives us a chance to understand what the design process can look like and how do we influence by all these things. So I study a lot of this work in the context of design methods. So I would probably call myself as well like a methodologist. So when we study design methods, sometimes we want to understand like, well, what are different ways can we work with youth and different people? And so I work on something called participatory design, which is sort of a method focusing on engaging users in the design process. We look at how to emphasize democratic and collaborative relationships between users and designers. A lot of the different ways I work with youth and teens is through design methods, so design techniques. This is a paper I written in like 2013, so a while ago. Sometimes we have adults and children, or adults and teens, or adults and youth. And we often need a technique that sort of helps mitigate those power dynamics, which is really hard. They're really messy. And so oftentimes these techniques will generate artifacts. Well, like maybe perhaps we'll design like a wireframe, or we'll come up with a story, or in this case. So for example, in this particular technique, we have something called big props, where children are trying to act out gestures this was when the Microsoft Connect first came out. Children act out gestures as a way to express how to, what are the designs that have to happen with this new technology at the time. And so I focus specifically on a very on a participatory design philosophy called cooperative inquiry. So I threw just two big words at you: participatory design and cooperative inquiry. Then those are two kind of slightly different things. This sort of specific philosophy focuses on children and youth and teens as equal design partners. So I look a lot of it as like, what are the ways that we can sort of raise the status of youth and maybe perhaps even lower the status of adults, right? That's kind of why I like to sit on the ground. I like to act a little more goofy than usual. Some people think I'm like a man child, but we'll talk about that later. But we really want to focus on the equal opportunities that youth can have in contributing to the design processes in different ways. And what I want to really emphasize, and when I talk about KidsTeam, people are oftentimes very overwhelmed by it. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't do what you're doing, right? I can't do this. This is really hard, having people come in all the time, because KidsTeam, I run KidsTeam about twice a week after schools, like for an entire year or so. So the kids I meet up with are like 50 or 60 times a year. I see them times like 5 years, 6 years, and I'll have like 300 sessions or so. But what I want to argue is that like there are very different ways to do participatory design. It's not all the same. Sometimes we have people that like to inform us, right? Sometimes we'll work really closely with youth and ask them questions, or like have them interview with us. And sometimes we like to work with a lot of youth. This particular study focused on the Horton et al. Focused on like, what happens if I could get like 150 children from an elementary school to work with designers in this case. And that's basically a very large session, right? For one day. Bonded Design from Andrew Large focuses on like maybe 5 weeks, 6-week sessions in this case. And for me, like with Allison Druin's work, I'll focus on this idea of a design partnership that we build over time in this case. And so this big question kind of lingers right now is like, what is a design partner, right? What is a way that we can work with youth and teens and children as design partners? And really specifically, the bigger question is, what's an equal partnership between children and adults? So one of the ways that we want to sort of break this down is we have to define the word equal, right, and equitable as two big words when we want to work with teens and youth and all that. And so equality sort of to us and for me means the same, right? So we need to oftentimes offer same opportunities. How can youth be in the same room as the designers? How can they offer these kind of their ideas? about decisions and designs. But at the same time, we have to always acknowledge the elephant in the room, that equity has to also be there, right? How do we actually emphasize that there is power between like children and adults, right? Or teens and adults, and how do we allocate resources and commit this kind of effort to helping others and their obstacles? And so Allison Druin sort of first came up with this idea that when I first want to work with youth and teens and kids and all that, I might think about them as users. Like, so I'm really far away. So if you think about the researcher, if the researcher is on the corner right here at that bottom right corner, the user is very far from them, right? It's kind of like I can watch kids, I can sort of like do these sort of observations, but they're very far. As children become testers, the influence starts to grows larger. Children, they might have to be in the same room with the adult now, actually, running usability tests and maybe some of the things that you all might be familiar with. And then informants. Well, if I might have to spend some time with children and youth and actually ask them questions or get some ideas. But Allison sort of and others at the University of Maryland and myself focus on this idea of design partnership, right? How do we actually think about youth and adults and kind of creating a way to work together? And so we have to sort of reframe a lot of what we think about what an adult is then, because that's also just as important. So the idea that a user, if the kid is a user, the adult is the observer, right? And again, very far distance. You can sort of think if the blue circle is the adult and the orange circle is the user, that is a very far distance between what we can understand about youth, right? We can watch videos. I can go to the park and like observe families. I can go and like look at YouTube videos. I can watch I can observe, right? I don't have to even be in the same time space continuum as children. But as testers, if children become that, then adults become test facilitators. Then all of a sudden, like we have to actually get even closer to talking with kids, right? Usability tests don't often run themselves, right? You actually have to like have a facilitator in the same way. Informants, as children become like, or youth become more like providing information through interviews or focus groups in that sense. Adults have to be interpreters. Again, they have the sphere of influence grows closer. And then as they become design partners, you notice right here, all of the adults and the children then become much more closer, right? But I still haven't really answered this question of what a design partner is. Like what makes this sort of a design partnership? That I have an undergrad right here, I have kids right here, they're designing. I think we were designing about creepy technologies. It could have been that one. I have to sort of figure out what that session was. But what's a design partner? What makes the kids and adults here work together? And so I sort of argued this for a while, is that I think a framework for equal partnership, a design partnership, I would say consists of these 4 elements. And these are the 4 things you would look for when you're working with youth, whether teens, high school students, middle school children, preschoolers, whatever. These are the kinds of things you would look for in equal partnerships. The idea of relationships, facilitation, design by doing, and elaboration together. And that's it. That's my talk. No, I'm just kidding. It gets really complicated because we have to, again, talk about this idea of power. Power is always kind of there and present. And so what happens is that like part of the thing that I always want to kind of calm people down about is that like when you work with youth or teens and stuff, you don't give up all of like all the things that happen. Don't necessarily feel like, oh, I'm giving this all up and it feels so chaotic. What I want to argue is that like during the time that you're trying to develop your relationships or facilitation or designing or elaborating, is that there's going to be lots of swings back and forth, and that sometimes children and adults dominate in their contribution and sometimes things are balanced, right? And what I want to argue is that all partnerships are like this, whether they're spousal partnerships, business partnerships, ice skating partnerships, dance partnerships. There's always an ebb and flow between balance and unbalance, between the person with power in the sense, right? And I want to argue that, and that's okay. I think that's totally fine. I think it's really hard to be, even in my own times with youth and children and families, it's hard to be completely balanced. And I'm going to be the first to admit that. So I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about with this swing. So under relationship building, we might see an unbalanced partnership when adults are socially far from children. But we might also see a more balanced partnership when adults establish that closer relationship with children. So what do I mean by that? So in this particular case, I have this particular graduate student in red. She is a brand new person, never done co-design before, just wanted to observe, right? So for her, she doesn't have any relationships with these kids. She's in the same room as the same children, right? But there's no relationship going on right here in this case. But in this next case right there, if you look at the young lady in the striped shirt, and then also the little girl in the green tank top, they have a different kind of relationship. You notice that sort of the adult gets down her level. They're talking about being a cat. The kid is crawling around, just pretending to be a cat, and they're just having a conversation about cats, right? It's this kind of thing that has to happen, right? Like, with adults and children and youth, they have to start building these kind of relationships, and that takes a while, right? So that ebb and flow between balance and unbalance should totally be okay, right? Facilitation also takes a while between balance and unbalance. And so, for example, unbalanced work with youth or teens or otherwise other partners, or when adults facilitate the session only, right? And sometimes it becomes more balanced when the adults and children facilitate together. So another example right here is when we look at this group right there, the adult in the black sweatshirt is asking, like, do you want to build a theater or do you want to build the rocket? Right? This is a session. And the child in blue eventually says something like, I don't know. I don't really know what I want to do. Right. And the adult says, well, you have to choose one. And the kid is like, I don't like either. Right. Here you see this sort of unbalanced facilitation of just, hey, like the adult is presenting the choices. The adult is giving them what to do. Right. And it's not quite a facilitation between adults and kids. But when we look at, let's say, a more balanced facilitation, pay attention to the girl in the blue sweater and the young lady in the white sweater. The kid is asking, like, so when we present the design, it has its own big sheet of paper on the wall. So she's pointing and proposing, like, can we do this on the wall? The adult on the bottom right corner says, yeah, I can hold the design too, or you can put it back up, right? And then what happens is, can we actually make it on the wall, right? Can we actually do this thing on the wall? And the adult says, yeah, let's do this, right? Let's do this on the wall. And so the kid gets excited. You actually see her stand up a little earlier. She eventually at some point points to the wall and says, we can make it on the wall, right? We can do this. This is not something that, like, wow, like this is something that's new that I'm allowed to actually facilitate this discussion. And so you also see, again, this sort of balanced and unbalanced relationship with adults and teens or youth towards when you look at, like, how they observe children in design. Sometimes adults purely observe what the children are doing, or sometimes adults get designed really closely together. So for example, the same adult from even before swings much more towards unbalanced, where she's just observing and watching this kid right here do the design work in this sense, right? They're kind of like, they're not really, she's not conversing with the design work. They're just actually kind of watching right there, right? Whereas in this case, you start seeing more balance right there, right? The adult is literally grabbing scissors, going at it. The child is pointing later on to the adult saying, do this, do that. I need you to do this, right? So the design work right here, when we talk, this one right here was, again, working on library activities. You're seeing really, really closely, literally physically, the hands are like that close together, right? Almost like as if they were one person. So elaboration together, same thing. The idea that ideas can mix together. Unbalanced partnerships when children only talk to adults, or vice versa, or a balanced partnership when adults and children elaborate on the ideas together. So in this particular case, sometimes in KidsTeam, we'll have an unbalanced motion. Sometimes adults are just taking notes. We just need to, like, work with the kids and just try to grab their under. This one right here was a review of Mario Maker, in this case, from the Nintendo Wii. Wii U. And so we were looking at, so we were grabbing sticky notes, we're writing all these ideas. The kids are providing some of the ideas. We might provide some ideas, but, again, it's kind of this unbalanced relationship because we're just sort of elaborate. They're just sort of, the kids are just feeding us information. But when we come more balanced together, we start looking at to see, like, how the ideas get mixed together. So this kid right here, the kid that's flipping, he's on the left side, right? He's flipping the pen. He proposes to build a random button to help people at the library. And I'm like, why would that be helpful to anybody, right? Random button doesn't sound like something that would work really well. And the kid's like, I think it'd be a fun idea. And then the librarian, who's right here on the right side, the bottom right, he asks, like, maybe like, tell me about how you think it's a helpful idea. I'm a little confused. I don't understand. And the kid says, well, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. He proposes that it's more like, like playful in this case. And then the librarian down on the right says like, well, oh, you mean sort of like a game, right? Oh, I get what you're sort of saying. This makes sort of sense to me. So you sort of see this dialogue exchange between me, the librarian, the child, and sort of trying to make sense of the idea, trying to mix the idea together. And so we sort of end right here at like, so what, right? What does this all matter? Why does it even matter with working with youth? And so like, because of Sesame, like, of course we have to have the count. So 3 takeaways, 3 things that you should think about when you work with youth or teens in this case. The first one is that equal partnerships are not either or. It's not like you either have equal or you either don't have equal, right? It's this constant continuum of spectrum, right? You're constantly trying to negotiate the adult power, the teen power, the youth power, like, there's constant negotiation. But as long as that negotiation continues to happen, that's the step in the right direction. As long as that power or that partnership is constant, just like, again, like spousal partnerships, dance partnerships, business partner, any partnership is all about that negotiation. And I would argue that design partnerships sort of fall in the same way. Similarly, we think that there's a lot of connections with those dimensions. If I go back to the dimensions right here, the idea that I think that there's a lot we would have to do. Let me go back right here real fast, just to sum up really quick, right here. That these dimensions, I haven't really studied quite yet, but we do believe that there are sort of these sort of relationships that happen, right? Ultimately, if I had to make a choice, I would say the first one is the most important. Right, it's sort of the base of it all right here, because you can't really. It's hard to do the rest without having good relationships with you. But that also means time, and that also means building a set of security in that sense, right? But being able to do that relationship portion leads you to more facilitation design by doing elaboration together. That would be sort of my take on what I think is the sort of relation, the connections that are all together. And sort of finally, as I sort of end right here, let me go through my slides real fast. Right here. We really do think that this framework of relationships designed by elaborating ideas and facilitation together really can be explored in other co-design contexts, whether it's senior citizens, whether it's the health field, but also, again, like teens as well, specifically in this case. So that's kind of all I have to say right here. I've hit the 20 minutes. So I just want to thank, there's a lot of people to thank, for folks, the kids and parents of KidsTeam, the Seattle Public Library, lots of NSF grants and IMLS grants that have sort of funded this work. So I'm happy to close, and you tell me what's
Thank
next.
you so much, Jason. And man, oh man, does that dovetail beautifully into some of the next pieces that we want to share. And to those of you who are here, please populate your ideas in the chat, your questions and whatnot. We also are going to have a lot of breakout time. We don't have time for Q&A right now, but there will be some time for debrief and discussion and meaning making later on. So put your ideas in the chat, write them down, make sure you're holding them as we're going along. And now I'm going to share just a little bit about Research Brief 2 and how this connects to a lot of what Jason's speaking about and links to the initiative that we are working on. Can you all see my screen? Loading. All right, great. So as Mary shared, we are now into the second of 3 briefs. The first one was published last month. This one is coming up in the month of June, and its focuses on understanding youth. I anticipate that many of you are starting to think about what does it mean to do a needs assessment to shape our strategy, to shape any insights we might have. And Research Brief 2 is sort of based on this idea that there are linkages between understanding the needs of this new audience, new for most of us in the public media sphere, and how that might then lead us to do better adult and youth collaboration. So speaking a lot to what Jason was talking about, whether or not you're ready to do co-design or you're kind of earlier on in that spectrum like he was talking about. But we really believe that the partnership work, the collaborative work, because these are new technologies, because youth are experiencing things that none of us experienced as kids in terms of media and tech, that we need to really rely on them and their insights so that we can get to innovative and responsive offerings for them and for our communities. So in Research Brief 2, part of what we are drawing from is organizational learning research. And there are some really interesting practices and mindsets and qualities of organizations that have been studied to be ready to take in lots of information and to use those needs to shape their insights and to be able to then apply them to new innovative approaches. And so there's a couple of things. First, recognizing that especially when working toward developing something for a new audience and with new means, relationships are really key, just like Jason was saying. So I love how this is building from that. The second is that this process of pulling in needs, trying to make sense of them, understanding it, doing a little experiment, figuring out what you learn from that, and this is a cyclical process. It's not linear, it's experimentative, it's sort of messy, and creating a culture in your organization to allow for that messiness and for that learning is really important as we think about working with teens and tweens. To make that all actionable, of course, we have to have processes for reflective learning. So Jason talked a little bit about this as well. What are the ways that we may debrief or we may do conversations as we're in the middle of a program or building new things out so that we're putting those insights into action? And then the final piece, and I want to do a big shout out to WHYY's new toolkit, and they cover this really beautifully, just the idea of starting small and setting yourself up for success. So those are some of the key insights that we wanted to pull through. When we think about different ways that you might get information to shape your understanding, of course, you can hear us saying over and again, like we want to start with the youth. We want to start with relationships and the conversations with them. Ultimately, hopefully, maybe moving in a direction of co-design. But even if you're not there yet, starting first and foremost with those relationships, getting youth in front of you, talking to them, having authentic dialogue with them. We also want to remember that it's not just from the youth themselves. Also, if we think about the field, obviously you are all here, and so you understand the value of doing field-connected work. So that is really important to shaping your understanding and surfacing the needs. Some things that we want to call out as really valuable is many of you are doing beautiful youth-facing media already. Knowing what other people are doing and what is out there is really important. Not only in the public media space, but also in the commercial space, the things that are taking up our kids' attention. And then also in the field building area, making sure that we are aware of the youth serving orgs and schools, libraries that are operating in our area. Because a lot of times, especially as we're getting started, piggybacking on work that's already going on or with adults that are deep in youth development work can be a beautiful way to begin. And then finally, not forgetting that there's researchers out there and figuring out how we link the research into practice. Obviously, that's part of what the CUNY Center is set up to do. In the brief, we give a lot of other resources as well that you might go to think about how to follow research in a way that is actionable and also easier to do. Today, we're really going to focus in on the youth. And we know that public media stations who have been doing the young child work for years have a very clear mental model of the kids that they are wanting to work with, and their teachers and their parents. And we need to build a parallel kind of depth of understanding about these young people who are teens and tweens. And recognizing that, especially developmentally, 10 to 18 is a really wide spectrum. So knowing who the kids are that you want to be working with, what are their tech and media engagement habits, what are their interests, what assets do they bring? So having a clear mental model of who those folks are. And we're going to start getting into that a little bit today. I'm not going to get into a lot of depth, but I do hope that you will look to Research Brief 2. There's a lot of really wonderful resources in there for research that is synthesized, data trends, ways to find out about after school work and other sort of community partnerships, and then a wonderful starting list of the public media work that is already happening in this area. So you can go and start using this as a way to think about what your approach to your needs might wind up being. All right, that is the end of the research component. And we are now going to shift gears